This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Good morning, truth seekers. Welcome back to Hit the Road Jack, Finding the Zodiac. I wanted to start with some cleanup from last week. While there wasn't a lot of foundation set for what we covered, I do know that we talked about some things that might have been a little shocking to individuals who have wrapped their mind around the Zodiac Killer in general. But I do plan on revisiting that type of information at a later time. I was hoping that we would stick more to the forms and how they related to the lipstick killer in the chronological order in which this presentation is set up, and that didn't happen. So I apologize if there wasn't a foundation set for the John Benet Ramsey note, and I know that we will be getting to that at some point. I even considered doing a crash course on all of the communications breakdown of the handwriting identification, but then that kind of forced the hand and we weren't really walking through Jack's life to find the Zodiac. But I know that at the end, you will see the similarities, you will see the use of disguise, you will see all of the attributes that we will talk about in the handwriting. Also, some interesting information is that I received a phone call from Tim Miller. If everyone remembers the very first letter that I showed, which I referred to as the finale letter, it was sent to Tim Miller in regards to his daughter that was killed in 1984. It really took a lot of culpability for many of the crimes that we're going to talk about as we go through the presentation. I was excited to hear from him. And of course, one of his first questions was whether or not I still believed Jack Terrence was the Zodiac. And I confirmed. So I am waiting to speak with him again in regards to how we can start going through this information to see how it pertains to his daughter and whether or not we can get some type of resolve to any of these cases, as a matter of fact. So without much more ado, we're going to get into the Texarkana Phantom murders, or at least the return to California for Jack. So we're going to head right back into the presentation at this point and start with a murder of a 6-year-old girl. This was interesting to me because it came obviously right after the murder of Susan Degnan in Chicago, Illinois. I'm sorry, Illinois, Reno, I hear you in my head when I do that. Anyways, so this particular murder was a 6-year-old little girl, Rochelle Gluskoder, and she was abducted in the neighborhood of her home, and she was kidnapped, they said, and then later found murdered. So there is some cross connections, and I like to say that the Zodiac likes to cross one crime to the next, either via a communication or the actual act. So this is why I bring this one up, because it is an unsolved murder to date. So she was wearing a red print dress, and the connection there I found to the desktop poem from the Sherry Jo Bates murder in Riverside. This poem actually spoke about she was wearing a red dress. So it doesn't necessarily mean this is the only murder that there is a red dress. I think we have one or two more that could also be possible cross connections. One of the things that I actually took note to was that she was also wearing what her mother had described as brand new shoes when she was abducted. So this brought me back to the possibility of her having been held alive for some time. Just like in the Oakland County child murder cases where the children were taken care of, or I'm not going to say that because likely abused, but they had been capped before they were actually found dead. And it had shown that there was somebody actually still caring for them, feeding them, and that is a possibility for Rochelle. So basically, she was found wearing her brand new shoes that had been worn. I wasn't sure if the weather could do this. It appeared as though she'd only been missing, I believe, less than a year before the body was found. So I don't know if weather could do that to shoes or if she was actually held alive and wearing those shoes for the entire time until she was actually murdered. Eyewitnesses claim that she got into a black convertible coupe with a man described as 30 years old and was never seen alive again. Jack at this time is only 18, but I believe that many probably thought he was older than he actually was, just because of the eyewitness accounts always seemed to report somebody of an older age, but then the actual arrests of suspects all happened to be at a much younger age. So I am not sure if when they're putting this information out, how much of it's actually kept from the public or how much is withheld so that they can actually apprehend a suspect once the information that individual knows is something only the murderer would know. So anyways, Jack is 18. I believe that many probably, yes, got there. So this is also consistent with the lipstick killings where they had indicated the eyewitnesses had seen gentlemen in their 30s or 40s around the sites, and then they arrested Bill Hirons for the actual murders, and he was only 17 years old at the time. So the age and the time frames with the eyewitnesses are not matching up with the actual people who are being apprehended. So it still kind of throws me into a quandary as to whether or not we do believe these eyewitness statements or if they are accurate considering the differences in time or age of the individual who is actually arrested or a suspect for the crimes. This would be the re-entry, what I call the re-entry murder into California. Like I said, Jack likes to kill in one location just before he leaves, and then he also commits a new crime when relatively soon after he returns. So this murder also occurs right before the Texarkana Phantom murders, which it's not coincidental, I suppose, because it is Orange County and Los Angeles, that J. Gordon Bowers was the same inspector as the inspector on the Georgette Bowerdorf case. So now this inspector is actually overseeing two murder cases, this one here with Rochelle and the one with Bowerdorf. So they did actually, in this one clipping that I found from the internet, state that suspects have been arrested, with one in particular having allegedly been committing an immoral act on a 6-year-old child on the date of Rochelle's disappearance. So allegedly, we're not sure who obviously told them this, but this individual obviously didn't, if he's there hurting another 6-year-old child, at what time frame, and did he have the opportunity to actually be the one who abducted Rochelle? I'm not sure about all of that. Again, information that I don't have, but some of the things that were going on during this time or with her parents was that they were opening up a new restaurant, and so they were awfully busy, and Rochelle was at a friend's house playing, and then that was the last time she was seen. Let's see. So although the murder of Michelle Gluskoder had been completely forgotten, it is one of the worst cases after the post-war period. Rochelle was a brown-haired, brown-eyed girl of 6, was playing in the yard of a neighbor at 1113 East 85th Street when she got into a black convertible driven by a man in his 30s, as they said, and she was never seen again. Los Angeles was consumed in a massive search for the girl. Investigators went house to house, examined riverbeds and sewers, rounded up known sex offenders in the area, and checked on phantom. I love the word phantom. We see this a lot. Sightings of a young girls elsewhere in the city. Led by Eugene Biscluiz, I'm not sure how I'm going to pronounce his name, the sheriff's posse made a canvass on horseback of what were then large swaths of undeveloped land in South Los Angeles and didn't find anything. The newspapers ran stories about other killings as early as 1924, 1927, and 1937, but it appears as though they had their suspects for those murders, and so those individuals were not likely going to be suspects in this case. However, they did bring that up in this article. So basically, in March of 1946, her parents, Abe and Miriam, finally did open that delicatessen in Los Angeles or Orange County. That was postponed when Rochelle was kidnapped. And shortly after the opening of the restaurant, a gentleman named Bonito Cabrera was hunting rabbits off of San Diego Boulevard about 3 miles from Irvine Lake and found the bones so weathered that the investigators could not determine a cause of death. And I'm not exactly sure how long it takes for a body to decompose or to become so weathered that they can't determine that. That does seem like there's an amount of time in there, and we know that Los Angeles tends to be a rather hot area, so I would think that the terrain could be a harsh place for anything to be, whether it was decaying or not. She was identified by her dress, by her mother, and of course, the tweed coat that she was wearing, and she was puzzled about the shoes because she knew they were brand new. So I'm not sure what the explanation, or if anyone offered that explanation. The other things that I point out in this particular case is that at some point in time, the suspect begins to talk about rabbits in future communications. Now, I don't know if that is a hint to some other crime, or the possibility that the hint is again led back to the reporting of where the body was found and that the individual who found them was hunting rabbits. So it does become something in the future that we're going to talk about, kind of an Alice in Wonderland type thing with a watch and no time and other media references again. Or simply, did the suspect actually read the newspaper and throw in the twist of the rabbit's clue to connect this crime to the next? We can only theorize that at this point in time. But I think that the mentioning of rabbits and the newspaper mentioning them is something that the suspect would have heavily been looking at and wanting to tie together. So several men were questioned over the years, but nothing ever came of it. And the Gluskoters eventually left Los Angeles, and the case remains unsolved. They do go on to talk about some of the things that occurred with the individuals, including one actually of the people they talked about earlier having been part of other serial killings had actually been freed after 15 years. Because he was innocent. So we have to keep in mind that Jack has indicated there are people who have taken the fall for him, and in some cases that means innocent people. At this particular point in time, we know that Jack is on the move. I just recently read in Stephen Dewhurst's book that his mother was with him when he married his wife in March of 46, and that he left shortly after to return to Texas with his mother. And at that point in time, she was actually driving a black coupe. The right-hand picture is actually the parents identifying the clothing from the crime scene where the body was found. And they talk a bit again about those shoes. I would really like some input from anybody who knows anything about weathering clothing or weathering shoes to know whether or not that was something that would indicate that she had been killed shortly after she had been abducted, and then the shoes became worn over time due to the weather, or whether or not she was actually kept alive and wore those shoes for many months before she was killed and dumped. I did find a marriage certificate on her parents. However, I was stifled by finding any other information that would indicate who they were a part of, who they knew, why they may have or may not have been a target, whether this was random or if this was something that was more meant to be. But that's something that I do think that in the future, when I have that opportunity or time to see if I can find more information on this, that I will do. I also think that since this case is still unsolved, it's another one that the FOIA files, or the Freedom of Information Act, should allow or provide all files so that the public can see what is involved with this case and possibly offer some help. So the abduction we have pointed out up here at 1113 East 85th Street, and I mapped out where the dump site was. Of course, this the map system gives me what it thinks is the most convenient route, but doesn't necessarily mean that that's the route the killer followed. However, the distance between these, taking the route 605, is approximately an hour apart, which is within the realm of what I see the Zodiac Killer doing. He is roughly within 2 to 2.5 hour range of abduction and dump sites, and also within his own proximity to the murders and where he might be living at the time. So this is within the range. And this is right before where we step into the next series of serial killings, which is the Texarkana phantom murder. A lot of things here play into, again, we have a map showing from Chicago, Illinois, the route that might be taken to pass back through Oklahoma into Texas and its way back into the Los Angeles area, which is where Rochelle Gluskoster was abducted, and then finally up to the top left-hand side there to Alameda County, where we see Jack getting married. So a couple of things, just background information. Letha Marie Self, Jack's soon-to-be wife, is from Welling, Oklahoma. Mr. Dewhurst's book indicates that that is where Jack met her, so we know that he was in this area just a hop, skip, and a jump from Texarkana, and purportedly had left after his muster out of the military back to Texas. But I don't have anything that shows that Texas is where he would have returned to, since we know his mother is in Chicago and he's marrying Letha in Alameda County. But at some point in time, he actually met her in Oklahoma. So I'm still trying to put all of those pieces together. And we know that Jack files his discharge papers in 1948 in Oklahoma as well, and that as late as 1980 he was still carrying a PO box, even though he hadn't been in Oklahoma for a very long time. So some of the keys we found in his belongings was one of those questions. Did they go to a post office box? Did they go to a locker at a train station? There was a lot of guesswork or theorizing what these keys may go to, like the one that we've seen that led back to Illinois. So this is the path that I would expect for the Texarkana murders that are next. At some point, Jack has met his wife. We do know that. And he had to have obviously met her at some point in time. I know back in the day, people would do these gunshot weddings or I'm sorry, shotgun weddings and marry rather quickly because everybody was going off to war, but we had just come back from war. So it wasn't like he was hurrying up to marry before he had to leave. So that may also lend to the solves that we saw from Harriet Suchet, where she indicated that Letha was actually with Jack in Chicago when he had committed the Dagnan crime. Now, I don't know it to be true. I'm just saying that's her solve. And there might be some credibility to that, since Jack likely knew Letha before marrying her, and maybe even months. And if I can come to that information or get that information, I will update that at that point. So this is giving proximity. Welling, Oklahoma is approximately 2.5 hours from the Texarkana phantom murders / moonlight murders / red phantom murders. And we're going to explain how that name came across, because this is one of the connections to the Zodiac Killer case, is that he writes as though he's the Red Phantom. And up until a couple weeks ago, I couldn't even figure out where he gave himself that name, how that tied into other murders, because I had not found one that had listed him as the Red Phantom until I researched this information on the Texarkana in the last couple weeks. So, and they're all direct paths to Jack's mom in Chicago, Illinois. The Phantom was said to have lived in caves on the outskirts of Texarkana, which Jack talks about having done while he was on his own. And the Phantom is gone once Jack is gone. So again, that kind of every time a serial killing starts, Jack's there, and whenever it stops, he's gone. So we're going to follow that pattern too as we go through. So Dewhurst's book says that Jack was mustered out of the Navy in December 11th of 1945, and Jack's record shows that he was at the training sites until 12/11 of 1945, but his military discharge shows that he didn't leave the Navy until 10/22 of 1947. So he still had access to military bases and anything else, I'm sure, along with any privileges that came with being in the military. Dewhurst also said that Jack was given a train ticket on December 11th of 1945 to go back to Texas. Jack would tell the stories about wandering through 12 states, holding a variety of odd jobs. He claimed to have killed a number of people in those places, among them a couple in Florida with a .32 caliber pistol. Excuse me. These murders are coming up. We're going to talk about that one in Florida, how it pertains to Jack, and other information that he has given in regards to a possible culpability with that case. As I stated, there was nothing back in Texas for Jack. His mom was in Chicago at the time, or at least that's where I believe she was, and that he had met his wife in Oklahoma. They got married in Alameda County on March 15th, 1946. And I don't have any information when they met, but clearly before they married. And Jack leaves Letha 3 days after they marry to purportedly return to Texas with his mother. So this is something I read in Dewhurst's book, and I believe that this is probably recounts that Dennis has made to Mr. Dewhurst in regards to statements that Jack has made. So if his mom is now with him, there is a good chance that the re-entry murder of Gluskoder was him returning to California to marry Letha, and then obviously needing to leave and make plans for his mother, which means that he could have been moving her back from Chicago with him and then returning her to Texas, where she remains for the rest of her life. So he rejoins. So basically, if he's mustered out on 12/11 of 45, he rejoins the military 1 month after the last killing spree, after the last murders in this killing spree. So he is in this particular area, evidently with his mom. Letha is back in California. And they thought that the suspect lived in caves in the area, like Jack claimed. And Jack says that he had to jump off a train to avoid the police, like the Texarkana police believes the Phantom did. So let's go ahead and step into those particular murders. And the Texarkana Phantom, aka Moonlight Murders, aka Lover's Lane Murders, which is identical to Zodiac in 1968-69, and a murder we're going to see in Florida in 1946. The Gazette today makes an interesting comment about social attitude in the 1940s, and that has to do with how the police dealt with and the public responded to crimes involving rape or sexual deviancy. Today it is front page news, but in 1946, the public press glossed over any such activity. While Miss Moore's body indicated telltale signs of rape, and while the offender had sexually abused Mary Jean Larry with a pistol barrel before she escaped, the newspapers, the Gazette included, remained mum on that particular aspect of both crimes. If rape was hinted, it was a generic criminal assault, which could mean any number of things. I bring this up because this is when they report something like a sexually abused, it is the attempt to make it appear as though it is a sexual crime. And so many of almost all actually, of the unsolved crimes that I have sifted through in the last 10 or so years, when I came across one that was a possibility that it was Zodiac-like, I did take a look to see whether or not there was any signs of rape, because I did not find that Jack was doing this as a sexual predator. I believe that the cases that can be connected to him did not include an actual sexual rape, that he sexually abused them with an object, just as we see in the newspaper report of Miss Larry. So we have 1 month between the first two crimes, then 3 weeks between the third and the fourth killings. This again fits right on into the Zodiac persona, where he comes in, he initiates the first crime, he leaves, he comes back, he commits another crime, he leaves, he comes back. And so he is really never in that location when the bodies are found, when the investigation heats up, and when they're looking for this person. And this is why we get the name Phantom. The Moonlight Murders is a term created by the news media, refer to the true unsolved violent crimes committed in and around Texarkana in the spring of 1946 by an unidentified serial killer known as the Phantom Killer or the Phantom Slayer. The unknown killer is credited with attacking 8 people within 10 weeks, 5 of whom were killed, usually 3 weeks apart. The attacks happened on weekends between February 22nd, 1946 through May 3rd of 1946. The first 2 victims, Jimmy Hollis and Mary Larry, survived. So we have survivors who again report this hood that the Texarkana Phantom is wearing, as we can see back here in the back. It is a very much Zodiac-like hood, and I think that that is probably one of the reasons why he also left victims alive in the Zodiac spree, to report back again that hood. Again, another tie-in. Some officers are not sure if their attack was connected with the murders. The first double murder, which involved Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore, happened 4 weeks later. The second double homicide involving Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker occurred exactly 3 weeks from the last attack. The Texas Rangers came in to investigate, including a living legend at the time, M.T. Lone Wolf Gonzalez. Finally, almost exactly 3 weeks later, Virgil Starks was killed and his wife Katie was wounded severely. Most officials no longer connect the attacks to the other murders. Contrary to popular belief, the killer did not attack during full moon, but did strike late at night, and typically on a Saturday, as we find with the Zodiac killings. The close time frame of the Gluskoder girl in Los Angeles and the first murder in the Texarkana suggests that Jack wanted to make it appear as though 2 serial killers were operating at the same time. However, we will show that the transition from each crime includes a murder in one state that is very close in time to a murder in another that eventually has its version of what the Zodiac Killer did in California. This is not a coincidence. It's a pattern that is easy to follow. I've even created a link analysis sheet on it to be able to see how those murders transpired and when they occurred and when they ended. The killer will usually kill one person when the spree begins, and then he leaves the state, and then he returns, which is why most of his aliases include the word phantom in it, because he was a ghost. Once he has left the area, he generally returns for one last kill so as to make law enforcement believe he is still local while he's really far from it. The only couple to survive the attacks and make an identification of a hooded murderer is just like the Zodiac not overkilling the males. Theory is that he needed someone to report his description to instill that terror and to make sure that it was correct. Jack would frequently return to Texas and Chicago area. We have additional pictures at different times with Texas, Michigan, and Illinois, which substantiates that he is still continually traveling through these areas. So on February 22nd, 1946, Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jane Leary were killed on Richmond Road and Robinson Road in Texarkana, Texas. The seclusion of Richmond Road beyond town, known as Lover's Lane, something in a hood of what appears to be, I don't even know why I wrote that. It's not even clear English. So something about the hood appears to be of a canvas type, which is consistent with the Zodiac hood. The stranger flicked on a flashlight into their faces to blind their perceptions. We know that this is something that the Zodiac did as well. Mary Jean Larry had been violated in a perverted manner, and Miss Moore had been seemingly assaulted. No one at the time thought to tie the two incidences together. Lights from a vehicle saved Mary, and the killer began cursing and ran off. This is something also like trying to get into the Starks' residence, and while fighting with the front screen door, the suspect began cursing again. So clearly when things are not working out in this killer's way, or the way he believes it should, he has no problem using expletives to portray his frustration. He used a .32 caliber revolver in the Hollis and Larry killings. Jack talks about a gun being taken by police, which we get to here a little bit later. A very interesting conversation where he talks about being arrested and his gun being taken from him, and him actually going to the judge's house and asking the judge to take him to get his belongings back, which included a gun that might tie him to these murders. The killer speaks, "Do as I say and I won't hurt you," which clearly that's what the ransom notes were about. I will give her back to you if you pay me, but he never has any intentions of doing that. And he clearly is going to hurt someone. So the article indicated that Jimmy's lips quivered. "What do you want? My wallet, the car?" And the suspect answered, "Your britches." So the voice chuckled this time, "Remove your britches." It's an interesting Southern statement. So a man wearing a white mask with holes cut out approached driver's side door on a lover's lane with a flashlight and gun, ordered them out of the car, and told Jimmy to take off his britches. Again, Southern reference, the Zodiac flashlight, the gun sight as a gun sight, and a mask. Beaten with either the pistol or flashlight, but survived. Mary claimed to have been sexually assaulted with the pistol, but not raped. Sexual assault with an object, once again, an attempt to make it look like a sexual crime, so that they would be looking for different people for different motives. I haven't done any research on any of the family members of these victims either, since this is so old. And again, finding any information on the internet is pretty much nil to none. The suspect actually demanded money and accused Mary of lying about not having any. This is a possible cross-connection to the 3/15/1947 anniversary and suicide note found in Santa Barbara, California, where the author apologized to a Mary, and we don't know who that Mary is. And it is also an anniversary for Jack and Letha on their marriage day or on their wedding day. Mary Thames is the victim from 3/12 of 1944. So we have another Mary. This is the one from South Carolina that we talked about much earlier. And the sheriff at the time was W.H. Bill Presley. Moonlight Murders Texarkana Phantom was 10 weeks long, as we discussed. And we have 10 victims, 3 survive. And with the Zodiac, we had 7 victims where 2 survived. James Mack, or Jimmy Hollis, was a 25-year-old insurance agent at the time of the attack. He was born September 25th, 1920. He lived at 3502 North State Line Avenue, a house which no longer exists, quite like Casacchio in Illinois. On the night of his attack, he was at the movies on a double date with his brother Bob, who was also an insurance agent. After the movie, he dropped his brother and his date off while he was taking his girlfriend home. They stopped on a lateral road off of Richmond where the attack occurred. Hollis suffered 3 fractures in his skull, so he was pistol whipped and was hospitalized for several days at Texarkana Hospital, also known as Pine Street Hospital, which stood at West 5th and Pine Street and no longer exists as well. He was in critical condition. After 4 days, he showed slight improvement, but was still not fully conscious. He was released from the hospital on Saturday, March 9th, 1946. His doctor told him it would be some time before he was completely well again and that he was not to work for 6 months. By the middle of May, he was still recovering from his injuries. 3 months after the attack, he stated, "I still get nervous when I think about it at night, on the street, even downtown." Hollis was questioned several times by officers after the other killings. Starting at the end of April, he spent a week with Mary Jane Leary, first Texarkana victims in Frederick, Oklahoma, which again leads us right back to Oklahoma and makes me wonder whether or not this was an intentional attack. There was a purpose for this particular crime. Either way, the fact that they are back in Oklahoma is again reinstilling some of those cross connections and proximities for Jack. And so he visited her in Oklahoma before residing in Shreveport, Louisiana. Hollis eventually married and had 7 children. He had a Bachelor of Arts in History and a Master of Science in Public Administration. He worked for the IS government. Again, another interesting cross connection. I don't know if that was something that he was doing at that particular time when he was doing insurance. But he loved to dress in Western clothing, including a cowboy hat and a holster and a pistol. And we've seen Jack actually wearing the likes of this same type of attire when he was in Texas, because they could actually wear their pistols right on their hips. He appeared in the 1971 television film They've Killed President Lincoln as a Vice President Andrew Johnson. That was an interesting take. So insurance agent, government worker to actor. He eventually moved to Houston, where he began working for NASA. Again, we are just following that same exact line that I believe that Jack was interested in. Hollis died in his sleep at the age of 54. His family remembered him for his jokes and sense of humor, as well as his love for the outdoors, including camping and hunting. So Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jane Larry site. We have the Richmond Road up to the right-hand side, and we actually have, well, Richmond Road is actually approximately 20 minutes outside of Red River Arsenal Army Base. So this is a location, again, where the murders are occurring somewhere near a veterans hospital or an army base, which would allow that suspect to slip right back into military life and not even be noticed by the public in most cases. So now we are up to March 15th of 1946. We have the marriage certificate of Jack and Letha getting married in Alameda, California. I did have a private investigator run a check on Letha self and swap some services for that. Using her social security number, he had found that her last name was now McFadden and that she was residing in South Carolina. Although her social security number shows no previous addresses in Oklahoma, it may be because she was a child and hadn't really been put on the map yet. And all the addresses that the private investigator could find for her actually led right back to South Carolina. After, like I'd said, 3 days after Jack married Letha, he stated he had headed back to Texarkana and boasted about this particular trip, while Dewhurst's book states that Jack headed back with his mother to Texas, maybe to get her set, but he certainly did not stay around for long and continued moving his way through the 12 states that Dewhurst's book talks about. Suddenly, he left Texas in March of 1946. Well, that was kind of a little bit backwards. So, no, he left back to Texas in March of 1946 after marrying Letha, and he rejoins the Navy here shortly. So Jack's military begins in the Texarkana Phantom Murderer is gone and never heard of again. On January 21st of 1948, Jack's discharge papers from October 22nd, 1947 were filed in Atoka County, Oklahoma, which is 2 hours and 44 minutes from the Texarkana Phantom Murders, but definitely on the same path that he would have traveled to either come back to California, to Texas, or back to Chicago, Illinois. At some point, I do believe there is a record of Jack moving Letha back to Oklahoma or Arkansas. I need to find that source. I think it was a family member that indicated that, but we will see some further residents in Oklahoma for at least Letha. Immediately after marrying Letha, like we said, Jack leaves for an unknown period of time. And we have the March 24th, 1946, Richard L. Griffin and Polly Ann Moore, which were also attacked on Robinson Road and Highway 67 in Texarkana. So they were found Sunday, March 24th, 1946, 1 month after the Larry Hollis attack. A driver on a rural Bowie County Highway 67 found 29-year-old Richard L. Griffin, a recently discharged Navy CB. So again, leading right back to more military. Lying on the back seat of his girlfriend, Polly Ann Moore, who was a checker at the Red River Arsenal outside of town. So this leads us right back to a connection to the Red River Arsenal again. Forensic tests would show that the bullets that had killed them were fired from a .32 caliber revolver, possibly a Colt. Moore had been killed outside the car, evidenced by blood stains and drag marks. She appeared to have been sexually assaulted. Fingerprints and footprints were hard to trace, they said, as a heavy downpour had washed away both during the night. Shot in the back of the head in the Lover's Lane section off Highway 67. That is very consistent with the Zodiac, Los Angeles murders, and the Florida murder. Richard Griffin shot in the head 3 times, and Polly Ann Moore shot in the head. It is my belief that it is likely that Jack came into contact with her at the Red River Arsenal, and Richard Griffin lived with his mother, Mrs. R.H. Griffin. which somehow I related to Elizabeth Short, who worked as a checker at a military facility as well. So also the Sherry Jo Bates poem referenced in April of 1967 that was found. So here we have the map of the Red River Army Depot, and again, where the individuals were killed. This crime scene is within approximately 20 to 30 minutes of the Red River Arsenal and Army base. On April 13th of 1946, Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin were found dead at Spring Lake Park, Texarkana, Texas, last seen alive at the VFW Club on 4th and Oak Streets in Texarkana, Texas. So we have yet another relation to military, or at least veterans. The combo, Betty Jo and Sherry Jo, which was rather interesting that we have both of the type of names involved with this killer. Betty Jo Booker went to school and was in band with H.B. Tennyson, who is suicided in 1948. And I say suicided because there's lots of information to suggest he did not take his own life. But when we get there, we'll be able to talk about that. Here again, we have a cross connection between victims, which I didn't expect to see. But after researching and finding this information about H.B. Tennyson, I researched him and found that he was the son of a steel magnate, I believe. But we'll get there. So shot several times. Both these individuals were shot several times, and the bodies are found miles from their car. So either the car was taken by the suspect and abandoned, which we have seen happen in the Bauerdorf case, where he stole Bauerdorf's car and it was found later out of gas in another location, or they were chased to the point of their death. If the car was taken, this is following Bauerdorf and more stolen cars, which Jack admitted to doing. Again, a .32 caliber was used. 3 unidentified latent prints were collected. It would be interesting to see if those prints have any thumbprints in them and whether or not they can be cross-connected to the thumbprint that I have of Jack. Betty Jo was reported to have been raped. Again, we don't know if they were just reporting a rape or a sexual violation. Again, information, if these files were released, could help establish the actual motive or the MO that the person had used in these crimes. On October 6th, 6 months later, the missing saxophone was found near where her body was. I don't know how it took 6 months for anybody to find the saxophone, considering if it was near where her body was, you'd think they would have done a complete sweep of that area. On Saturday, April 13th, 1946, it was one of many Saturday night gigs the band had played at the hall over the last year. So again, it's a Saturday night murder. Sunday at 1 a.m. is the last time Betty Jo was seen by band members. Martin's automobile was discovered abandoned at the entrance of Spring Lake Park, nowhere near the slumber party to which Betty Jo was purportedly headed to. Paul's body was located first north off Interstate 30, a mile and a half from his car. He had been shot several times. Betty Jo was found nearly 2 miles distant outside of patch of woods near Fernwood, also north of I-30. Like Paul, Betty Jo's body was bullet-ridden. She had also been sexually molested. So sexually molested makes me think, again, violated with an object. This time, official records didn't deny it. Ballistic tests confirmed the bullets that had killed the teens. The .32 caliber matched those that had taken the lives of Moore and Griffin 3 weeks earlier. Zodiac admits to have shot a man in a car with a .32 caliber. There are many cross connections for this, and the killing of Paul Stein in San Francisco, though I'm not sure if that reported the caliber of gun that was used. Another police officer in the California area was shot parked in his car. We also have an officer in 1963 surrounding the murder of John F. Kennedy, who was also shot parked in his car. So many cross connections, and I'm not sure which one this suspect was referring to, or that the Zodiac was referring to, but there are definitely several in this presentation that it can be attributed to. Here are some of the graphic pictures from the actual crime sprees and how the bodies were left after they were killed. And of course, the map once again on these last 2 murders and the distance between the VFW, the place where the car had been abandoned, and the relation to the Red River Arsenal and Army Depot. It's approximately 40 minutes away from the Army base. The last murder, which I think is the exit murder. Well, actually, there's one more just beyond this, but this is a murder of a couple on May 3rd, 1946, which is Virgil and Katie Starks. They are 10 miles up Highway 67 in Arkansas. And I think that this is Jack making his way back to California. Virgil and Katie Starks lived in a remote area, but so far untouched by the Phantom at the time. On the evening of May 3rd, that would change. A shot blew open a pane from the front window, and Virgil was struck in the cranium. He jerked forward and sent the newspaper fluttering across the living room, blood spattered. An immediate second shot hit him again in almost the same spot, which tells you that the person is extremely good or a really good marksman with a gun. This time the body convulsed and fell limply sideways across the chair arm. An immediate, where do we go there? She felt a battering pressure. So Katie felt a battering pressure drive the phone off her ear. So she had hopped on the phone to call a neighbor. And at that point in time, she was struck by a bullet, and that ripped through the phone and her ear, and a pain that burned through her right cheek before she even heard the explosion from behind. So she was hit before she had even heard the gun fire. Instinctively, she began to turn toward the sound of the blast when another shot boomed to tear her lower jaw from the upper. So this means that the individual, once again, is a good shot. If he's hit her twice in the same place and she is literally moving about trying to figure out what's going on. It is interesting that the newspaper marks that the jaw was torn off, because as we move into the Black Dahlia murders, we do see that her jaw was clearly cut or torn, what we would call almost off. So as she repaired from the house, she heard the kitchen door finally giving way under the intruder's ramrodding, following by a stream of curses. Bloody handprints smeared on the walls and furniture indicated that the murderer had dabbed his palms in the pools of blood at Mr. Stark's feet. This is crazy because we're going to come into other crime sprees where blood is used to actually mark the walls. Sonoma County has Jack's palm print. I know that it was turned over by Dennis at one point in time, and if these palm prints are still available in the Texarkana Phantom murders, then I would think that they could attempt to make some type of connection to that palm print. Bullets removed from the Starks were fired from a 22 caliber semi-automatic shotgun, not a 32 revolver. So far, the Phantom's weapon of note was the 32 revolver. So this kind of did throw a quandary as to whether or not this crime was connected. Second, the modus operandi was all wrong. It wasn't a Lover's Lane teenagers at this time, but Jack may have needed some type of funds to get out of town. And I don't know if they indicated whether or not there was anything actually taken from this crime scene, but this may have been his resolve to getting the money or what he needed to get himself back to California. At this particular location, an untraceable flashlight was found outside the Starks' home, and this is why they actually dubbed the person the Red Phantom. And we see in the Marco letter from the Zodiac, he calls himself the Red Phantom. Virgil was shot in the head twice while sitting in a chair reading a newspaper. This is identical to the mob hit on Siegel, which is much later, but similar to the way this crime went down. Katie shot twice in the face, tearing a jaw from her face, again, cross connection to Elizabeth Short's jaw being cut back to her ears. The flashlight left at the scene of the crime may have been the one used in the first Texarkana murder that was reported, and we know that the Zodiac liked to use that as a gun site. Nothing was taken of value, they say. The 22 caliber semi-automatic weapon used is just another one of Jack's likes. He absolutely loves the 22, as I'm told. So it's one of his favorite caliber of guns. This murder actually occurred 47 minutes away from the Army base, which is in an opposite direction of the way home. So is this Jack on his way back to Chicago to help his mother move to Texas? I don't know. Well, it looks like we are pretty much down to one murder left with 1 minute to go into the presentation. I do want to remind everybody that next week we are going to meet Jack on film via the documentary put together by Dennis Kaufman. It does explain much of the information that Dennis had collected on Jack in regards to circumstantial evidence that supported Jack being the Zodiac Killer. But we're also going to get to hear Jack speak and talk about some of the things that I read off earlier in this presentation. I look forward to that. I look forward to additional handwriting identifications that we're going to show as we move through this. And of course, once this is done, we're going to see the pickup of the Los Angeles murders and the Black Dahlia crime spree and many other women that were killed during that time. So stay tuned. See me back here next Friday, and we'll take a look at Jack and meet Dennis. Have a great week. Oh,